Вроде живем. Вроде живем. Окей. Ну, я пока не стрима одну тему прочитал. React testing. Callbacks and components. We have already covered some basics of React testing, and now is the time to dive deeper. In this lesson, we'll learn about mocking. Furthermore, we'll discuss a React component from this. Discuss a React component from this. Perhaps understand how React tests are written in real-world application. Неплохо. Carry out mocks in the context of React testing. If you have been following along with our lesson so far, the concept of mocking has already been introduced in an early section, and you might have incorporated mocks in your Battleship project in the testing JavaScript section of this course. Let's look at how mocks will help in testing React components. Testing callback handlers. Так. Callbacks are ubiquitous. Every avenue of user interaction involves callbacks. Sometimes they're passed as a props to alter state of the parent component. Consider this simple button component. This button, a simple component with a couple props passed in. We're interested in the on-click prop. We have no idea what the function does. We have no idea how the function will affect the application. All we know it must be called when the user clicks the button. Let's test it. Notice how we mock and test the on-click function. Custom button, render button, click me. Screen get by role button, name click me. Expect the button to be in the document. Click function when clicked. View function user event setup. Render custom. Const button screen get button click me. Await user click button. Click to have been called. Should not call the onClick function when it isn't clicked. Through this, and we are done with this component. You should be already familiar how the first test works. It takes some time to figure out what functions come from which package. The second and the third test, we mock the onClick handler using the one of the latest function. Then we assert that it is called not called when the button is clicked or not. What if you want to set up your mocks before each block rather than every test? That's fine in some cases though. Having all of this set up for a test in the same block as the test itself makes it easier to understand in particular test as it eliminates the needs to check the whole file or context. This makes the review of subsequent changes in the project. Having all of this set up for test in the same block as the test itself make it easier to understand any particular test as it eliminates the need to check the whole file for context. This makes the reviewing of subsequent changes in the project down the road substantially easier. Additionally, decreases the chance of having leakage create problems throughout the test suite, unless test file is getting really long and the test prep itself at dozens of lines in length. Default to setting up in each test case, otherwise you may use before each to invoke render the component, and it is discouraged to call renders. Function outside of the test itself. For example, call renders and the user event functions outside of the test itself. If you find yourself repeating the same code in multiple tests, recommend approach to shorten each test is to write a setup function. Invoking user event setup before the components is rendered. This is done. This can be done in the test itself or by using setup function. To discuss rendering, we're using any user event functions outside of the test itself. Reason described. Четко. Чё оно крутится? С чем это сделано? Что это означает? Mhm. Mocking child. Companies you might have some or come across the concept of mocking modules. In React, when the component tree gets large, tests can become convoluted, especially for components higher up in the tree. That's why we mock child components. This is not something you will come across often. Nevertheless, it's beneficial to realize the concept in case you might need it in your own testing pursuits. Concept of mocking modules in React. When the component tree gets large, this can become convoluted, especially components higher up in the tree. That's why we mock child components. Check the news. Mhm. Что такое flip move? В данном случае пустоту. Has submission. Text center. Dark Zebra putting a bunch of stuff like any other decent React component. There might be a couple of familiar things on there. Don't to worry too much about them. If you take a glance at the pros, there are some functions in there, presumably even handlers. Let's look at what the component renders. If there's a user submission, it renders submission component. If has submission is true, sort the submission render them with submission. Otherwise, a heading that says no submission yet be the first. If all submission path is true, it renders p tag. Just going through the code, it should give us some idea of what to test. It will be rewarding if you take a couple of seconds to map out what test we could need for submission list. Ну, проверить, или оно рендерит. То есть, или проходит вот эта вот проверка, или проходит эта проверка. Потом... Default props. Интересно, это как? Это, наверное, не знаю. Sense. Well, this uses to definitely mock shell components must be that the React testing library instead uses data test ID by default. Ooh. Just mock. Не понял. Set up props, submissions. ID. Describe submission list. Describe submissions. It renders the submission array in order of likes. Render submission context provider value. No, by test ID. Does not render a submission when array is empty and the use submission provided, and instead renders a submission message. Короче, понятно. Context. List test JSX. Notice there are two child components of submission list. One of them is a form, a package called React Flip Move. External code will mock it. Child submission list is a from a package called React Flip Move among the submission component. We only render the bare minimum to realize the validity of the component we are testing. Next, we set up our props with fake data and mocked functions. Let's move towards our first assertion. Don't know too much about the project submission context provider. In the context of this test, its purpose is to act as a route to pass in the all submission pass prop. We already identified the 3 points of interest that we want to test. We divide them into 3 test suits for readability purposes using describe. In the first suit, makes some assertions if the user has submission, and then some assertion if the user does not. The other suits follows a similar pattern. Explain further. Feel free to flick through the other components and their tests. You'll see mocked functions. You'll see some unseen functions like acts. You will see custom render functions. It's fine if you don't understand it. All the goal is to gain familiarity. The other important thing is to note is almost all the tests follow a certain pattern in terms of the way they're written. They follow the arrange, act, assert pattern. It's a good idea to adopt this pattern sooner or later to make your tests more readable and ultimately better. Especially pay attention to the last bit about testing asynchronous code. It's nice to be familiar. Booking check components. Mm, 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 mm. Create form test. Че оно там находится? Че оно не посередине? М. For arranging and formatting code, this method. Each method should group these functional sections separated by blank lines. Arrange unnecessary preconditions and inputs. Act on the object or method under test. Assert that the expected results have occurred. Examples. Clarity separates what is being tested from the setup and verification steps, clarifies and focuses attention on a historically successful and generally necessary set of test steps, makes some test smells more obvious. Is being tested from the setup and verification steps. Attention to historically successful but generally necessary set of steps, makes some test smells more obvious. Assertions intermixed with act code. Supply so much to this unback contract, then you specify your contract arranging. Ясно. Понятно. Так, secrets of the act IP. Prioritize interaction with act. Tackle care of the rest. Now note that for async act you need React versions. In fact, let's start with a simple component. It's contrived. It doesn't do much, but it's useful for this discussion. CTR, set CTR. Что такое CTR? Use effect. So it's an app with two hooks used to initialize. Minute. Your energy C1 is on your screen. So you the effect run immediately and updated the state in that render. So you write a test for this behavior. So in everyone's favorite testing framework, Jest. That doesn't seem right. The value claims to 0, but how can it be? Let's just do something strange, or are you just hallucinating? The docs for use effect make this a bit clearer. By using this hook, you will tell React that your company needs to do something after render. How did you never see 0 in the browser? Even for a single moment. Understand this. Let's talk a bit about how React works, since the big fiber rewrite of your React doesn't just synchronously render the whole UI every time you poke at it. It divides its work into chunks and queues it up in a scheduler. And the components above, there are a few pieces of work that are apparent to us. The first render, where React outputs 0, the bit which runs the effect and sets state to 1. the bit where it renders and outputs 1. This is a brown run. Our test at a point in time when React hasn't finished updating the UI. Could hack around this by using use layout effect instead of use effect. Well, this would pass the test. We will change product behavior for no good reason and likely to its detriment. By waiting for some time, like this is pretty ick. And we're depending on your setup. It hasn't even finished updating the UI. You could hack around this. Use layout effect instead of use effect. But this we have changed product behavior for no good reason. By waiting for some time, like or so, this is pretty ick and might not even work depending on your setup. Neither of these solutions are satisfying. We can do much better. Introducing new testing IP act guarantees two things for any code run inside its scope. Any setup set updates will be executed. Any unique and queued effects will be executed. Further React will warn you when you try to set state outside of the scope of an act call. When you call the second return value from its use state, use render hook. Let's run a test with this new IP. It should render 1. Mhm. The says no pass and short act is a way of putting boundaries around those bits of your code that actually interact with your React app. This could be user interactions, IPs, custom event handlers, and subscription firing. Anything that looks like it changes sometimes in your UI. React will make sure your UI is updated as expected so you can make assertions on it. You can nest multiple calls to act, composing interactions across function, but in most cases you wouldn't need more than 1-2 levels of nesting. Let's look at another example, this time events. I presume I think Chemist Counter, you render this to browser like before. So far so good, let's write test for it. Document create element div, document body, penchild element. Attach the element to the document body to ensure events work. Show those. This was when the warning doesn't fire. For set states called by real event handlers, and for all this purpose this code is actually fine. But you get suspicious, and because Sanyo told you so, you extend the test a bit. This fails and button should claim to be one. Well shit, at first it seems annoying, but that has uncovered potential bug here. If the handlers are error code close to each other, it's possible that the handler will use tail that and miss some increments. The fix is simple. We rewrite the with state call with updated from form set counter, and the test passes. This demonstrates the value act brings to grouping and executing their actions together, resulting in more correct code. Timers. Let's keep going. How about stuff based on timers? Let's write a component that ticks after 1 second. Exit amount. Let's write a test for this. Well, what could we do here? Let's lean on just timer max. Use fake timers. We're able to convert asynchronous time to be synchronous and manageable. We also get warnings. Warning, when we run all timers that come out in the component result triggering the set state. Like the warning advices, we mark the boundaries of that action with act rewriting the test. Spaces no warnings. Alternatively, let's say we wanted to use real timers, that is a good time to introduce the asynchronous version of act. Introduce in synchronous boundary for act rewriting the test form above. Так. Мгм. Мгм. And this pass no warnings. Excellent. This simplifies a lot of rough edges with testing asynchronous logic components. You don't have to mess with fake timers and won't build anymore and can write tests more naturally. As a bonus, it will eventually be compatible with concurrent model. While it's less restrictive than the synchronous version, it supports all its features, but in a sync form. The IP makes some efforts make sure you don't interviews these calls, maintaining a tree-like shape of interactions of all times. This time let's use promises. Consider a component that fetches data with fetch so we have control. This one is what just joking. The simple the previous example. Now that we have the synchronous version to capture, let's go revisit the component from the previous example. This will mock you might use something more advanced for your needs. Mm. You're using React test render, you should use React test render React instead. Can reduce some of the boilerplate associated with this by interrogating it directly with testing libraries. Certainly. Due to the tree-like structure of components in React applications common, the components higher up in the tree can become more difficult to test. So in the fact that they represent multiple complex tree components, decision components may require you to perform a number of interactions on the child components to set this stage. And since you may already have unit tests for the child components, you don't want to have to retest their functionality. What can you do? The first thing to note is that you may actually be wanting to interact with the child components in order to test the full integration of the logic of the parent component with all of the child components. However, if you're looking into unit test just the logic contained in the parent component, you will want to abstract away the functionality of the child components. With just you can mock the entire React component, and this is a great pattern for tackling the above problem. Let's say we have a parent component that contains a bunch of logic and functionality that we would like to test. Form initial users. Delete user. Use a child component. Username. Wait. Summarize was going to have a parent component with a form, creating a user groups and child component with the form, example for managing user, adding any users status is limited managed by the parent component, and the idea that when the user group is created, it's created with a list of users. Let's assume that we already have units test with the child component. When testing the parent component, we would rather avoid all the ceremony involved in interacting with the child component just to test out the parent component. For example, we would have to open the user form, select the form inputs, fill them out, submit the form, and then test that the parent component handles the first submission correctness. Then we will mock the child components to be simplified version that will make our test considerably more concise. We'll also add a little test utility for quickly asserting that the users are being managed correctly. Mm. Mock user. This broadened dependence it was few more components that doesn't actually capture the functionality of the original component. Your test could give false positives. Small component doesn't necessarily need to emulate the entire functionality of the original component, but does need to present the same IP, same props, and use some callbacks. Your mock component may also become one out of sync with the original component, and your unit tests may still pass. However, if you good integration and end-to-end test coverage, any such discrepancies should be caught. Ultimately, this shortcoming of unit tests in general, and that is why it's good to supplement your unit tests with integration and end-to-end tests. In summary, when you are looking to avoid test coverage, overlap duplication, looking to achieve more focused unit test, mocking check components. Callback handler. Без понятия. Через user event. Короче, call it testing. Type checking with propTypes. Pass a prop to a component. Не знаю. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Короче, 7. Nice. Быстренько. Type checking is the process of verifying that the piece of code is using the correct data types for variables, function parameters, and return values. In the context of React applications, we are going to use type checking is the process of verifying that the piece of code is using the correct data types for variables, function parameters, and return values. In application, we are going to use propTypes to do the job. propTypes is a way to type check the props that React component receives. It helps to catch potential type errors during development, making it easier to spot and fix bugs. If you have used a linter in your previous React project, there's a good chance it ended up yelling at you about certain props missing in prop validation. However, if that isn't the case, well, lucky you. The section contains a general setting up propTypes using common propTypes features. Getting started. To start using propTypes in our React project, we first need to install the corresponding library. We can do that with npm in your React project. propTypes package in the component whose props want to validate. This is based on how we would use it in a simple component that renders out a name prop. This example, the component render name expects to receive a prop called name, which is a string. This prop is not passed, but if it's not a string, a warning will be displayed. Using default props. Another cool thing we can do with propTypes is passing in default props. With the help of the default props property, we are defining a default value for the name prop. This way, if the render name component is called without passing in the name prop, it will default to Zach. When you do pass in props, they will take precedence over the default props. What about TypeScript? Now is also a good time to mention TypeScript. We covered it in our academia, but it's worth learning about it if you'd like more safety while writing your code. Learning TypeScript can be a lot of overhead when you're already learning React. Also, once you're comfortable navigating the ins and outs of React, you'll have a better image learning, a better time learning and applying TypeScript in your project. If you go in the direction of learning TypeScript, our recommendation would be picking up a previous project and refactoring the components one by one to TypeScript. Learn by doing. Read through propTypes documentation shows the types you can specify and some other useful things that can be done with it. А что последнее делал? Memory card. Probably. Вот это сейчас что? This is a TypeScript application. Products serve different purposes. TypeScript validates types at compile time, whereas propTypes are checked at runtime. TypeScript is useful when you are writing code. It will warn you if you pass an argument of the wrong type to a React component, give you autocomplete for function calls, etc. propTypes are useful when you test how the components interact with external data. For example, when you load JSON from an AP, propTypes will help you debug. In React's development mode, where your component is failing by printing helpful messages like TypeScript and props do the same thing and don't actually overlap at all. But it's possible to mathematically generate prop types from TypeScript so that you don't have to specify types twice. See, for example. Support is a reference. There is not much value to maintaining both your component props and TypeScript types at the same time. There are some cases where it's useful to do so. Such as component library that will be used plain JavaScript. Accepting, passing along external input, such as results from an AP call. Using data from a library that may not have adequate or accurate typings, if any. So usually it's a question how much you can trust your compile time validation. Newer versions of TypeScript can now infer types based on your React propTypes. Desert types can be difficult to use to refer to elsewhere in your code. The service was part of the React core model and is commonly used with React components. Using propTypes with React component, which also documents the different validators provided. Class. You can declare that the prop is specific, just primitive, but from these are all optional. Number or an array. And they can be rendered numbers. These types. They come type. Function string. Example. String, function string, or element like object. You can also declare that a prop is an instance of a class. Your prop is limited to specific values by treating it as a and noun. An object could be one of many types. A certain type. You can chain any of these above what is required to make sure a warning is shown if the prop isn't provided. With warnings and extra properties. Exact. Don't specify custom validator should return an error. Object if the validation fails, don't console warn or throw. This won't work inside one of type. Function props, prop name, component name. So custom validator to array of should return an error object. Validation fails. The validator will be called for each key in the array object. The first two arguments of the validator are the array object itself. Key. Migrating from React propTypes. Check out Migrating from React for details on how to migrate to propTypes from React propTypes. Note that this workforce features code mod script that performs the conversion automatically. Those important notes below. How to depend on this package. Perhaps we recommend putting it in dependencies with a caret range. For example, for libraries, we also recommend leaving it in dependencies. On issues and versions before, recommend using the minimal version. Make sure that the conversion range uses a caret use package. Extend the marking. Check propTypes. React will automatically check propTypes use sets on the component, but if you are using propTypes without React, then you may want to manually call propTypes like so. Nice. Can you set up custom validators propTypes? Let's look at the benefits of using. Подожди, а где default было? Так, почему здесь не было? Или было, и я пропустил. Не было. 6. To validate React props using propTypes. Да, не хочу это читать. Это вроде немного. Nice, nice. How would you set up a basic implementation of propTypes? Ну, установить пакет, импортировать потом название компонента propTypes и вписываешь в объект prop, название пропа, propTypes.type. If you pass in a prop to a component that has a default prop defined, if you pass, ну, prop, который мы передаем, перезапишет дефолтно. What's the difference between propTypes and TypeScript? Но то, что TypeScript проверяет типы в момент, когда мы пишем, а propTypes во время рендеринга. Compile time, the runtime. Give you autocomplete for function calls. That's useful when you test how the components interact with external data. Example, when you load an IP, propTypes will help you debug where your component is failing by printing helpful messages like React router. Does client-side routing mean? How do you set up a basic router which should be used in the place of a text to enable client-side routing? How do you create nested routes? What do you mean by dynamic segments of URL params? How do you add a catch-all route? Create protected rows. Ой-ой-ой-ой. Так. Production. Up until this point in the curriculum, we have been building one-page application. However, for any large-scale application, we're going to have multiple pages. Thankfully, the browser allows a client-side JavaScript to manage the way a user can navigate with the history IP. You can leverage the browser. You can leverage the power of this to manage routing in React with the help of a package like React Router. The push state and replace state method add and modify history entries, respectively. This must work in conjunction with prop state event. And modifying history entries using push state changes the referer that gets used in the HTTP header object created after you change the state. The referer will be the URL. This is the time of the creation. To display. This 0 clicks back. What's client-side routing? How do you use React Router to do client-side routing? How do you create nested and dynamic paths? How do you add a catch-all route? How do you add protected routes? Client-side routing. Client-side routing is a type of routing where JavaScript takes over the duty of handling the routes and the application. Client-side routing helps in building single-page applications without referencing as the user navigates. For example, when the user clicks a navbar element, the URL changes and the view of the page is modified accordingly within the client. Say you're cooking some chicken. If you want to cook it well and nice, you will have to put the chicken in the oven and set it to cook with appropriate time and heating. Wait until the dish gives out its satisfying smell. Start munching. This is common to all websites. You set the oven up for what you want. Wait for the oven to done with cooking and the loading screen. Cooking the loading screen, and tada, enjoy your delicious food. Your page is ready for use, but what if you forgot to add some spices before you cook it up? You have to repeat this flow again. Add the spices to the chicken, put it back into the oven, set it up to be reheated, wait for it to be nice and warm. Here's where reiterate. Here's where we reiterate. The chicken needs to be reheated. In general, multi-page applications. In a general multi-page application, the browser reloads every time you click on a link to navigate. With client-side routing, you never leave the page you are on. You bring the microwave to the table and ensure that you don't run the missing spices issue. The link requests are intercepted by the JavaScript that you write instead of letting them go directly to the server. A reactive solution. Why client-side routing allows for nicer app-like interactions. Since you are controlling the routes, you can make fancy CSS animations across route changes. A lot of caveats can be missed. Browser reloads notify screen readers of new content to read, so you'll need to notify screen readers of route updates manually. However, with the help of a robust library, you can often address these concerns. React Router is a standard routing library for React application. By using React Router, we can specify React components. Standard routing library for React application. By using React Router, we can specify React components that can be rendered based on the route. So much more. Adding a router. Let's make a small app to understand how this route is implemented. Create a new React project and let's start by adding some mock pages as an example. Replace the app just file with some basic content too. Now it's time to add the router. There's a couple of ways of defining our app's routes. With React Router, it's recommended to add the routes as objects. Install package. Add the following to main.js. We'll talk about what is happening in a little bit. Так, const router, create browser router, path element app, path file. Once this is done, go ahead and run npm star and check on both roads, the home road and the profile road. It works. Relevant router provided from React. Router is used to create the configuration for a router by simply passing arguments in the form of an array of rows. Configuration contains objects with two mandatory keys: the path and the corresponding element to be rendered. This generated configuration is then rendered in by passing it to the router provider component. The link element. You may notice when we click the link in the navbar, the browser is reloading for the next URL instead of using React Router. This is what was promised. To help with this, React Router exports a custom link element to be used instead of the irregular A tag. We can replace A tag in our navbar with the link element. Now this is the version of the link, the React Native version. Right. Link is an element that lets the user navigate to another page by clicking or typing on it. Link renders an access element with a real ref that points to a resource. It's linking to this means that a link things like right clicks a link work as you would expect. You can use link document to skip client-side routing and let the browser handle the transition normally. Relative link to value that does not being with slash results relative to the parent routing, which means that it builds upon the URL path that was matched by the route that renders that link. May contain to link the routes further up the hierarchy. These cases exactly like the command line. Normal link to is different from a normal. When the currently URL ends with slash, ignores the trailing slash and removes the URL segments for each. But an href value handles differently when the current URL ends with relative. But all links are relative. The route hierarchy so will go up on one level. But all links are relative to the route hierarchy so go up one route level. Occasionally you may find that you have matching URL patterns that do not make sense to be nested, and you would prefer to use relative path routing. You can opt into this behavior with relative. If you're using restoration, this lets you prevent the scroll position from being reset to the top of the window when the link is clicked. This will prevent the scroll position from being restored when the user comes back to the location with a back forward button, and just prevent the reset. Example when you might want to this behavior is a list of tabs that manipulate the URL search params that aren't at the top of the page. You wouldn't want the scroll position to jump up to the top because it might scroll the tangled content out of the can be used if you would like to replace the current entry in the history stack where history replace state instead of default. The state property can be used to set stateful value for the new location which is stored inside history state. Can we use to skip client-side routing and let browser handle? Okay. You don't get the browser longer too. Верно, не работает. Link to profile. This generally loading instead of using reaction. Is to throws outlets and dynamic segments. Now what if you want to render a section of a page differently based on the different URLs? This is where nested rows into play to render a section of a page differently based on different URLs. This is where nested rows into play. We can add rows nested as a children one another to ensure that the child gets rendered alongside the parent. Create a couple components. Popeye spinach. .g6 spinach. Господи. Can rewrite the rows as given. With profile, element profile, children. With spinach, element spinach. Render the child components alongside the parent.